A few months ago, I passed the 1,000 subscriber mark on my YouTube channel here, and my 1,000th subscriber was George, and George asked me if I would make a video on sauerkraut, so that's what I'm going to do today. Got a bunch of cabbages, and we're going to make sauerkraut. This is my 10-liter crock. It has sauerkraut that's been fermenting in it for just over 2 months. I'm going to take all the sauerkraut out of it now. I'm going to put it in half-gallon mason jars. The top of the crock here has a channel with water in it. That water prevents air from getting in as the fermentation gases escape. So I'm just going to use a dish towel and I'm going to soak up all of that water. This is a clean dish towel. You don't want to use anything that might have any germs on it. Take the lid off, get the liquid out of here. And I've got really clean hands. I've just washed my hands with hot soapy water. And I've also just washed my jars with hot soapy water. Even if your jars are clean, you want to make sure that they are cleaned again right before you use them so that nothing settles in here. You don't want any yeasts or airborne bacteria in your jar. Now inside the crock I've got a few inches of brine, and then I have my fermentation weights. And I use glass weights because they're non-porous and they're not going to absorb any bacteria or anything that's going to cause an off flavor. So we just can take those out now. It smells like sauerkraut. And I have a few leaves here that I use to just hold everything down underneath the brine. So I'm going to remove my cabbage leaves. You can eat those, they're really delicious. Then I've got sauerkraut. This is fresh sauerkraut, and we're just going to pack it in the jars. I don't want to lose any brine. I want to keep all of the brine because I'll want to make sure that all of the sauerkraut that I pack in these jars is submerged under brine. So as I'm pushing it down in here, I'm really poking it down. I want to make sure that everything's underneath the brine. And you can store these in the refrigerator. If you have a cold basement, you can store them there. They'll continue to ferment if they're not in the cold. So a cold garage in the winter or something, you don't want them to freeze, but you don't want them to continue to ferment after you like the taste. Then I've got this, it's called a pickle pebble. It's a piece of glass. It fits down in a mason jar. And it's just going to hold that sauerkraut under the level of the brine. I can push it down in there with my thumb. That pickle pebble, I just washed it with hot soapy water. You don't want anything that could be dirty going in there. And then I'm going to put a lid on. I like to use these plastic lids on the mason jars. This is just the wide mouth mason jar plastic lid because they won't corrode when they get in contact with the salt. Can you hear how crunchy this is? I eat a bowl of sauerkraut pretty much every day. I mean, I don't know if the camera's picking this up, but the sauerkraut isn't just crunchy, it's squeaking on my teeth. This is raw, unpasteurized, home fermented sauerkraut. It's unlike anything you can buy in a store. Sauerkraut is a pretty easy and simple thing to make. You're going to need cabbage. I'm using a green cabbage today. The amount of cabbage that you want is proportional to the size of your fermentation vessel. This is my fermentation crock. It's a 10-liter crock. It's made in Germany, and it will hold 20 pounds of sauerkraut. So I've got enough cabbages here so that after I take out the cores and I remove the outer layers, I'll have 20 pounds of cabbage. I have glass crock weights. These hold the sauerkraut below the brine in the crock. Some fermentation crocks come with ceramic weights, but I have found that they absorb liquids, and then bacteria and yeast and things, they can start to smell weird. So I like the glass ones because they're pretty inert. They're not going to absorb anything. The other ingredient that's essential for making sauerkraut is salt. And this is sea salt. You don't want to use any salt with iodine in it. So I just got this in the bulk bin of my natural food store. It's just plain sea salt. This is my scale. I'm going to use that to weigh the cabbage, and I have a big steel pot here that will just provide the area for making the sauerkraut, pounding the cabbage. I pound the cabbage with my cabbage tamper. It's a nice long one so that I get good reach, and it has a big end here. You don't need to have a cabbage tamper. You could use anything with a blunt end on it, including just a piece of wood. I have a sharp knife here and a cutting board. That's all you need to make sauerkraut. All of my equipment that I'm using, my crock, my big pot, my cutting surface, my knife, my cabbage tamper, and my weights have been washed just now with hot soapy water. So everything is really, really clean, and my hands are extremely clean. They've been washed with very hot soapy water. The cabbages have, this outer layer of skin is a little bit wilted. You want to just take these outer layers off. And I'm going to save some of these nicer outer layers for the top of the sauerkraut to hold the cabbage. So we're going to take a few of these and just keep them aside. Now the core of the cabbage is bitter, so we want to remove the core. You can see this central core. So I'm just going to cut that out. We don't need this at all. This goes in the compost. Then I'll just take my knife and I'm going to slice it very thin as I can. I'm not a super precise cutter, but just go down with the knife. I'm going to set my scale to pounds, and I'm going to keep filling my pot with sliced cabbage until I get to 5 pounds. I like to do my sauerkraut in 5-pound increments. So that one cabbage gave me about 2.5 pounds. I'm going to grab another one now. Winter is a great time to make sauerkraut because the cabbage that you get in winter is just really ideal. My scale is now at exactly 5 pounds. So this batch for the pot is done, and then when I finish processing this, I'll come back and do the rest. This is all the cabbage that I just cut. 5 pounds. So I'm going to add my salt, sea salt, not iodized salt. Iodine will inhibit the fermentation. Just sprinkle 2 heaping tablespoons of salt on top of 5 pounds of cabbage. I have a towel on the floor because cabbage juices are going to start flying. That's just to keep the mess down. I've got all of my cabbage with the salt in the pot and my cabbage tamper. So this is on the floor in between my feet here, which is just more comfortable for me to do. I think it's much more strenuous to do this up at upper body level. That way I'm sitting, I can take advantage of my upper body weight leaning over the pot, and I'm just going to pound the cabbage. So I'm just going to put my headphones on so I can listen to some good music while pounding cabbage. So I've been pounding this cabbage now for 5 minutes, and this is what it looks like. I've sort of pressed a mat into the bottom that I can break up with my hands, but the cabbage itself is still very much like raw cabbage. So we'll just keep pounding. So I've been pounding cabbage for 10 minutes now. You can see that it's starting to loosen up. The structure of the cabbage is starting to break down, and I can kind of squish it and get juice dripping out from my hand here. This is what we want. So we'll just keep going. It's nowhere near ready. Just keep pounding cabbage. So I've been pounding cabbage now for 15 minutes. And I'm starting to get to the texture I want. And you see how when I push down on my tamper, I'm starting to get an immediate liquid gushing out from the sides of it. That is almost there then. I've got a lot of dripping coming out when I get a fist of it. And in the bottom of the crock, I'm starting to get liquid pooling in the bottom. So this is good. We're creating the brine that we're going to ferment the sauerkraut in. I'm going to keep going for another 5 minutes and then we'll check back in. It's been 20 minutes now that I've been pounding the cabbage, and I've got a really nice bit of cabbage here now. A light pressure on my tamper. Brush this off. Light pressure on my tamper, I'm not even pushing hard, is now producing foam coming out from the sides. That's what we want. Also, it's really sopping wet now. When I put my hand down in here and scoop away, I'm easily getting water gushing and pooling in the bottom. And the texture is just, well, it's much different from the raw cabbage. What we've done is we've just broken that cellulose down with the pounding, and we've released all of the moisture in the cabbage. So we're going to ferment the cabbage in its own brine. And I'll add this now to the fermentation crock. I'm going to take the sauerkraut that I just made and I'm going to just transfer it right into the crock. I don't want to lose my juices, which we just worked so hard to make. So I'm going to keep tamping my cabbage in 5-pound increments with the salt until my crock is full. I'll keep a gap at the top because it will expand as it's fermenting. But I'm going to push down every layer with my tamper just to pack it down as tight as possible. If you wanted to add some seasonings, you could add them now when you're putting it in the crock. Caraway seeds are a very traditional additive to sauerkraut, and juniper berries are also a very nice traditional additive. Some people add grated apples. Some people add thinly sliced onions. I think that you could put any vegetable in with your cabbage. You could put grated carrots. I'm just going to make plain sauerkraut today. got my last batch here that I've pounded out. So 20 pounds of cabbage is done. We want to use our tamper, really push it down. Just keep pressing it down gently. You don't want to pound in this ceramic crock and risk breaking the crock. But you want to pack the cabbage down really firm so that you give yourself that head space, because the cabbage is going to expand when the fermentation happens and it needs room to move. And also, you want this brine coming up to the top. You see how as I push on it, the cabbage is moving down and the brine is moving up. Just keep working at it. Because I've been tamping this down with the addition of every 5 pounds of cabbage that's gone in, it's not too much of a job here, but I'm just leaning down on this cabbage tamper, moving it around. I'm going to clean up my lip here. We saved at the beginning a few pieces of cabbage leaf, and so we're going to use those now. We're going to lay it on top, flatten them out, and lay it on top of the sauerkraut just to sort of make a lid. Because as the fermentation happens, little bits of cabbage might want to come up to the surface. And anything that comes in contact with the surface is an opportunity for bad things to happen. You could get mold growth, which would be very bad. So I've got all of this now covered in this layer of cabbage, and the cabbage is going all the way to the end, but on the inside it's not coming up the lip. And then I've got my fermentation weights. I'm going to slide those in and nestle them. They're 2 parts so that you can get them inside the crock with this restricted top. Get that leaf off. Now I've got those, and I'm just going to push everything down again. I'm going to just use my hand and push down. I want the liquid coming up so that those crock weights are covered. See, I've got the crock weights covered. That's very important because you want to make sure everything is submerged now under the natural brine that we made. If you didn't get enough brine from your cabbage to do this, then you can make brine to add to the top. And I'll put a recipe for how to make brine in the description. It's just adding some filtered water or purified water with salt in a ratio. So I've got plenty of brine now to cover my crock weights. And I'm just taking off any floaters, because anything that floats to the top is going to be an opportunity for naughtiness. I'll clean this up. The lid on. Now this crock has this ring around the edge, and that's designed as a water seal. So I'm going to pour water into it. And the water is going to allow gases from inside the vessel to escape, but air is not going to be able to get back in. And so that will keep out things that we don't want. We don't want mold growing on our fermentation. And if you get mold, hairy green mold, then you've ruined your project, and you should start again and really clean everything. Keeping everything clean is really to inhibit the growth of mold or anything that's going to make it funky or a bad bacteria. So this is now done, essentially, and we can just let it sit at room temperature or in a basement or something for weeks and weeks. I like to let my sauerkraut go for at least 6 weeks. I prefer it over 2 months, really. So it can just keep going, but you can, take the lid off and remove the weights and get down in there and taste it. And if you want to let it go longer, then just put the stuff back on and let it go longer. So I really love sauerkraut. I think it's an amazing food. An unpasteurized, raw, homemade sauerkraut is full of beneficial bacteria, probiotics. And I had a parasite in 2006 that I got in Peru, and it was a very long, hard recovery from that. And I think that after adopting a daily regimen of fermented vegetables, especially sauerkraut, I got a lot of my health back. So I'm a big believer in sauerkraut. It's very easy to make. It's something that you can do at home, and it's delicious. Thanks for watching.